breath work, beware. Because if you want to go in and see what it's going to go into places you just never knew you were alive in you that really need to have to look at. Everybody has their own breathing signature. It's just like a handwriting, and that signature is the hologram of your life.
I started this study group because it just seemed fun. Like I had no agenda. I do want to teach more because, like, just even saying that made my whole body kind of mixture of like excitement and terror. But I have to do it because I keep getting this guidance that I have some very valuable things to contribute. I'm a connector. I'm like a connector archetype, I guess. I just really love to have people find the thing they need, and like see someone with something beautiful to share that maybe doesn't have an outlet.
I want people to read the book and to be interested in exploring the somatic reality of their breathing, not as a technique, not as a job to do, but something that invites them into being curious about, oh, breath holding. Yeah, I do that. Let me see if I can follow his ideas about how to pay attention to when I hold my breath and when I don't, and how to come out of, once I notice I've been holding my breath, how do I come out of that? How do I start to breathe again? Because breath holding is definitely, for instance, is changing the chemistry. It's gonna want me to do something, but I don't want to do what it wants me to do, because what it wants me to do is going to be counterintuitive to what my physiology really needs. It's an interesting thing about crowding. If you had a pipe that was 4 inches wide, you wouldn't try to put a 5-inch tube down a 4-inch pipe. So if you're breathing in and the tube is narrow, what speed, what pace, what volume do you take in to make it through the tube? It's sort of like being conscious of the size of the breath you need that allows you to breathe through that tube.
Right. It's slower than anything about me has
It's
ever been.
slower, but it's also it's less volume. You have to kind of titrate the air as it comes in. It's what I have to do with my deviated septum when the physiology is changing it to my left nostril, and I'm sort of resting or meditating or relaxing. That's a much slower rhythm than when I breathe, and much less volume than when I breathe through my right nostril. Remember where I picked this up, but the trigger for which nostril you breathe into when sleeping is under your armpit. So when you sleep on your right side, it triggers the left nostril. When you sleep on the left side, it triggers the right. I don't remember if it was a man or a woman, had a yogi who walked with a crutch. And when he wanted to breathe through his left nostril, he put the crutch under his right arm. And when he wanted to breathe through his right nostril, he put the crutch under his left arm. And
Wow.
so you like you say, what chore am I up to? Maybe I can control which nostril I breathe in to support the thing that am I active or am I passive?
And it's so interesting from an osteopathic standpoint how one of the things I remember learning was that position was also a way that the body would set up forces to do structural work on itself. Reorganizing of forces in the night to kind of reintegrate the body, which makes so much sense to me. The simplest of things that are not considered often. It's really what I focus my practice on. So back to your book here, Changing Chemistry, Breath Holding. I was saying that breath is a connection experience related to this. A lot of our trauma and inability to regulate stems from not having been trained well early in terms of co-regulation, right? So that this way of doing our somatic work now, embodiment practice, and even what we're doing right now, right? Coming into focus and connection. If you don't have another human, you have your own body and the earth and your breath.
Space.
a gateway.
You know, my friend Gail coined the term, everybody has their own breathing signature. It's just like a handwriting, and that signature is the hologram of your life. It carries the gestalt of who you are, and how you're breathing at a particular moment, it sends a very clear message. You get close to somebody who's breathing in an anxious way, you can feel their anxiety. So, you know, it's not far down. There's a company, I don't think it's in Canada or maybe it's here, that's going to be able to test COVID just for the breath. That's what's coming. Chinese medicine, they smell it. They smell the urine. They know what's in the breath. The breath carries the physiology. So that, you know, when we're gonna eventually, just like a breathalyzer, you're gonna breathe into it and go, yeah, you got COVID. You know, it's just going to be a breath test.
I loved many times in our class you referenced feeling states of just connecting awareness to bodily experience. I feel like that is key.
I was glad to see that article on interoception. I mean, that's what we're talking about now. Science is now validating that reality that Continuum has been paying attention to. That, you know, when you're in touch with your internal world, you can be a little more sane.
The point is, like, I had this image of micro movement through fascia is like striking a match. It's like a way to ignite vital energy in the tissues. And when you started talking about mitochondria, I wanted to, but didn't share at that time, that my experience when I'm doing breath holds or any breath work is that if I bring my attention into the deep fascia or into the metabolism as a behavior, and imagine or allow my chi to be used in lieu of ATP, essentially is something that's happening. I'm certain of it. Then my oxygen requirement is way low.
I don't know if you know Peter Litchfield, but his whole thing is that breathing is a behavior and physiology is a behavior. So he's a cognitive therapist as well, but I'm not that interested in that so much. And so what is influencing that behavior? Well, what influences the behavior is your entire life's experience. You're always shaping your behavior based on your experience. And especially if you've been traumatized, you've got a lot of behaviors that are covering over a lot of psychological, psychosomatic, psychological stuff going on. And that as you look at the behavior, and breath is behaving in response to your emotional psychological behavior, you use the study of breath and its behavior either on the norm or away from the norm, and what is influencing it to be away from the norm. So using breath to go in and be contemplative and meditative and see, I'm in this particular state of fear, activation, defensiveness, or whatever, and what is driving that behavior, and begin to unravel the behaviors, breath changes. And so there's no need to clear it out. There's no need to do anything other than let it regulate itself so that physiologically the behavior changes, so that physiologically the breath is optimized to deliver the maximum amount of oxygen to the cells that it possibly can. And then the body is really just taking care of itself. And from that place of idling, then what do I want to do with it? So you're right. So I swim, and I swim hard because I really like the way it pushes my breath. It makes me breathe harder, but I have a baseline that I return to that feels like, and you know, these terms get bandied around, authentic self, essential nature, things like that. But you know, I've come back to a place inside of myself where I recognize myself different than I thought I would be, but I'm at home in myself where I never used to be. And being at home in myself means my breath also is operating optimally when I'm at home in myself. So I didn't have to go through Wim Hof or any of those. I really had to unravel the emotional and psychological underpinnings of a breathing pattern and behavior that was not functional. And Buteyko didn't get to it. Buteyko was, and the big Peter Litchfield's biggest thing is you don't manipulate the breath. You just don't. You have to find a way that you learn how to allow breathing to express itself under the different circumstances and be able to return to baseline in health. And you don't manipulate it. Now, yeah, there are certain manipulations that actually function to do things really well. And certainly yoga does, though, and resonant frequency breathing, 5.5 in, 5.5 out, or a breath pace of 3.5 to 7 breaths per minute, tunes the heart. And they're all of those things, they're all manipulations. Breath work, beware, because if you want to go in and see what it's going to go into places you just never knew you were alive in you that really need to have to look at. I could do Wim Hof, I can do Buteyko. I'm never going to get there because underneath that, I'm carrying a tremendous amount of fear. So I can get my control pause to 35, but it's not going to change my emotional state. So when I started studying with Peter, I almost had a nervous breakdown because it just opened up stuff had never, ever looked at. No therapist got to it. Nobody got to it. Breath got in there and said, if you're going to breathe, you're going to have to face this. And so I faced it with homeopathy, and breathing. I really like this piece around the behavior. Though, I've had clients in my office on a capnometer, on the machine, looking at their breathing, trying to teach them Buteyko, nothing's changing. And then all of a sudden they cry and they release something they've been holding on to. I watch that breath come right back to normal, So I like Buteyko. I think it's a good introduction. I think the principles are sounder than hell.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the technique of using something that manipulates the breathing it works for some people, it really does. But they may not have the emotional things that need to be dealt with that I had to deal with. They might have been fine emotionally, and just doing the technique got them to where they needed to get to. I mean, it's very successful. I like Peter Litchfield's approach. It really worked for me. We're animals, and we sense things that we don't even recognize that we do. The air is poison.
Yeah.
We're traumatized by the fact that our air is poison. Whether you're aware of it or not, your animal body is aware of it. I mean, World Health Organization says clear and state, air is cancer causing.
Yeah.
It's cancer causing. How do you walk around and not be traumatized by that? Especially, I mean, that's what COVID's putting in everybody's face. Can't trust the air. Can't trust what's in the air.
The power doesn't come from accessing techniques in my experience, but I'm fairly alone in that. Even I do biodynamic osteopathy, which is pure listening and responding. And that just isn't a concept that registers most of the time, but that's what opens the door. And so I resist any kind of formula. Well, one of my principles is feel over formula with everything I teach, because I feel that once we can attune to what's actually present and respond to it, we're in service in a much deeper way.
That's what Continuum is.
And it's so much about not being obligated to take care of yourself. It's more like, where is the discovery and the adventure and the intimacy and the play? And like, it's more of an invitation than an obligation. This whole thing where we're losing this ability to seek the enjoyment and the pleasure and the nourishment from that nuanced experience of intimacy that we can never predict or it's like of the moment, constantly changing and very personal. And it's that whole area of our vulnerability and not knowingness and not mindness, and bringing some levity and sort of childlike wondrous attention to that as a lost location.
Love that line, lost location. That's great.
Yeah, it's a lost location. So much of what we're teaching.
That's a nice 2 words there, lost location.
All right. So I think if I sat down and said, what happened with Robert today, I would say I felt extremely validated and excited about how this recognition of my, validation of my feel over formula
I
approach.
like that too, feel over formula. That's great.
No techniques, like all about biodynamic and continuum both. When I just drop it all, that's when I completely dissolve. That's the thing. I don't drop into there if I'm trying to do anything. It's a complete surrender state, right? That we're talking about, where that really opens the door. The heart opening. Like also this thing you talk about the baby being held by just resting in the field of the planet.
I went home and every day for 6 months, I made sure I spent a half an hour on my belly for 6 months.
Hmm.
And one day I found myself on my back.
Hmm.
I didn't mean to get on my back,
Hmm.
but I had had enough
Mm-hmm.
where I was ready to now take the world in because I could also go back to the other. But it was just like so startling to me that I was like a baby. I rolled over and had no idea that I was trying to do that. But I did that for 6 months, and it was a revelation to let myself dry, especially after I taught a 3 hour anatomy class. I would come home, I'd be so out of myself, and then I would drop into the lying on my belly, and then I'd finally hear my heart and think, oh, okay, I'm returning to myself now. I'm starting to, I can feel my heartbeat. It would take 20 minutes before I could even find my heartbeat. So you get so far away from yourself. And it was such a grounding, and I still do it. It's such a grounding thing to just be on your belly and surrender to that baby state, really, basically, which is very, very restful and very nurturing, I find. We could do biodynamic breathing.
Oh my gosh. Did you just conceive of that in the moment?
Yeah,
Ah, see, I knew something brilliant would happen. Let's invent it right now.
right.
Who
People, what the
better
hell?
to do it?
Right. And people will say, what the hell is that?
Our work is always a function of our own wiring and life experience, and then that thing you said about how the breath is an expression of you and all your ages and experiences. Well, so is your osteopathic work. So to say what is osteopathy is like, it really is the function of the moment, and also the resonance and the alignment of the meeting, because what's a fit now versus later in terms of what really resonates. Yeah, so to get out of the way so all of that can find its way to where it needs to be, there's no version of the mind that can do a better.
No,
Love
thanks. I'll talk
you.
to you soon.
Bye, Robert.
Bye.